we are going to listen to Zohreh Rajabi, who is going to talk about women's perception of overall health and on safety in urban spaces, a qualitative and case study-based analysis of Tehran urban area. Zohreh is a social researcher and her background is in public health and communication studies.
This study, it was my first project in University. It has conducted 5 years ago, and it was qualitative research. Iran society has changed during these years, and my finding maybe no, for sure it has changed. Women perceptions of overall health and on safety in urban spaces, a qualitative and case study-based analysis of Tehran's urban areas. This study was aimed to explore women's perspectives on safety in public spaces, the gender inequalities associated with access to public spaces, and how this affects their overall health. This aim was examined through the scope of the gender and public spaces and feministic approach. I'm gonna escape from the first part. Women, based on gender perspective, women according to the gender equity perspective should have equal rights for presence and use of urban public spaces. Various factors and obstacles decrease women participation in urban public spaces. For instance, they suffer from harassment and insecurity in a city on a regular basis and confront it in various situations. For this study, a qualitative approach was chosen to provide insight into the problems and uncover trends in thoughts and opinion. Semi-structured techniques and focus groups as data collection methods were used. Thematic analysis was chosen as theoretically flexible because the search for and examination of patterning across language does not require adherence to any particular theory of language or explanatory meaning framework for human beings' experience or practices. This research has happened in Iran. My focus group, I had 2 focus groups in Tehran, one in central of Tehran and one in south of Tehran in Harandi neighborhood. According to my thematic analysis resulted, I had 5 main themes. The first theme that we has calculated, it was we cannot live a healthy lifestyle because of the neglected, unsafe environment. My sub-theme that I have extracted from the focus group text, inhabitants' actions create poor sanitary conditions which have negative health effects. Neighborhood environment contributes to unsafe conditions for inhabitants and hampers healthy lifestyle. The second theme was the strict culture and gender inequality seen in public spaces place a lot of stress and fear in women. No equality for women due to the social and cultural norms, social disorder and masculinized culture contribute to women stress and fears. No leisure places for women in Tehran. The third theme was public spaces are not designed to be inclusive for both genders. Gender blindness in urban spaces design contribute to unsafe conditions for inhabitants. Limited access to services in neighborhoods for women, spatial mismatches limit healthy lifestyle for women. In theme 4, we are ashamed because we live in poor areas. This adds to our mental stress. Being labeled as poor and deprived, criminalization and stigmatization of disadvantaged neighborhoods, feeling shame for living in poverty adds to everyday stress. Media portrays excessive criminal activity in poor neighborhoods. And the last theme was we could work together to improve our public spaces. We could reduce a lot of stress and strain. The sub-theme was no collective action or dynamicity to improve public spaces, lack of social tie and sense of belonging to neighborhoods. According to the gender and public spaces approach, public spaces are mainly designed and planned for men's presence. Public spaces being a hub for all types of activities should be accessible to everyone, regardless of age, gender, or occupation. However, women are less likely to take full advantage of public spaces, and their rights to actively participate in public spaces are limited and often encroached upon by their male counterparts. As a result of this dominant culture and structures and traditional genders-based rules of women don't have equal access to the city. Our cities provide employment and avenues for leisure. However, there are no platform to pursue other aspects of life. And the connection of my study to urban health is that it's important concern for participants, many of them who were working or living in poor or labeled neighborhoods. They felt that the environment that they live are not healthy, and especially regarding unsanitary conditions in many places, especially around trash bins, which lead to rats and an unhealthy environment for them. Most of the participants perceive that certain situations in neighborhood environment contribute to decreased choice for leading healthy lifestyle, limited availability of natural environment, ill equipment, parks, and unfortunate events have limited the places where women can frequent, create an unhealthy situation for them. Women describe their situation in relation to social and cultural norms as well. They undergo stress and anxiety due to the forced hijab and have to wear special clothes for reducing harassment or social control in their neighborhoods. The participants have experienced difficulties regarding social disorders that exist because of religious and traditional laws in Iran. Norms and laws cause them stress and an increased sense of fear and shame. Several participants discussed how the masculinized culture was affecting women. For instance, harassment by men in taxis, footbridge, pedestrian underpass, and crowded subway. A huge inequality between men and women was reported when women felt unable to use spaces in public, thus impacting women's health in a negative way. My participant reported that the lack of access to natural areas and places for exercising combined with unsafe situation make it difficult for them to spend leisure time in society. One of the findings of this study is that a misogynistic society based religious laws and social norms that create social disorder lead to inequality towards women. They do not have the right to roam around freely and partake in leisure activities as they feel unsafe. Furthermore, findings suggest a clear need for de-stigmatization of participants of women in urban spaces and awareness for changing a very misogynistic culture. A combination of unsanitary environments, regressive culture, stigmatization, and lack of social will collectively contribute to the sense of insecurity in women. This places immense amount of stress on their health and ability to lead healthy lifestyle. Cultural obstacles, stigma, and discrimination seem to be inseparable from Iran's society, in addition to political and religious norms which greatly influence women's overall health and well-being. Despite their concern and fear, women want to be seen in society as equal counterparts with full rights to public places and the use of scarce amenities. Also, I can say that the participants reported that they do not have access to many services and that the hegemonic masculinity in their society gives men more power, which then excluded women from urban design. They do state that the number of leisure places for women are not enough. Women of labeled and poor neighborhoods also expressed that they suffer from surplus discrimination, being women and living in disadvantaged neighborhoods. They state that these conditions were negatively impacting their physical and mental health.
Thank you, Zohreh Jan. So, Hamideh Saberi is going to talk about Iran's women enduring coercive control during COVID-19. Hamideh is a PhD candidate in global history of empires at University of Torino, and her research interest lies in gender studies, particularly in Iran.
Thank you, grazie. Hello, everyone. First of all, I'm very, very honored to be here and in front of you, distinguished audience. Zohreh Jun, thank you so much for your presentation. It's one of my favorite research, research interest. I think it's very important to actually talk about the relationship between health system and the effect of women's life. And Zainab Jun, thank you for introducing me. I want to start with saying that I'm coming from Italy, so excuse my English. No English in Italy. So my research is about women's during the coronavirus. In my presentation today, I would like to report on women's situation and how women enduring, some of the violence in quarantine. As Garrica Moreno explained, violence against women is the most widespread human rights violation. And studies show that domestic violence is among the most common type of violence. As you all know, since the outbreak of the coronavirus, the number of women who have been subjected to the violence has been raised globally. In this situation, the number of victims in countries like Iran, in which women have absolutely no support from civil society and the legal authorities as well, must be higher than in other communities. Although there is no official statistical data to measure the impacts of the pandemic on women in Iran, my research tries to reveal the prevalence of domestic violence against women during the pandemic based on some scattered report, tips interview, and field studies. The main question for the participants was, did the male figures in your life implemented more controlling behavior during the quarantine, and what were these behavior? It's needed to be mentioned that domestic violence has wildly different dimensions. In my study, coercive control or controlling behavior is the lens to analyze data collected in this research. Ewan Stark, one of the well-known scholar in this field, and his book is Coercive Control, explain coercive control as a form of domestic violence that creates invisible chains that allow men to violate women's human rights impunity. Coercive control as a behavioral model aims to control and manipulate a person, and this, Stark argues, that is the most men use to weaken women's autonomy through micro-regulation of daily activities. As we can guess, this stops women to access to equal personhood and free choices. He also employs the term liberty crime. It means you're free to apply this kind of crime through your, through women who can be your wife or your girls. And no one can actually recognize it as a violence, is not seen as a violence. Interestingly, he says masculinity is associated more with being in control than having the ability to use force. I mean, it's not something that you can see in everyday life, like the man in your life can control or monitoring your life without you knowing that this thing is happening to you. In his words, the assumption is that masculinity equals universal humanity and femininity is equivalent to irrational, emotional, and immoral. So this is like the definition that we have in mind from masculinity and femininity. Therefore, especially in the concept in the countries like, Middle Eastern countries, in Iranian concept, therefore, men have the permission, the right, and the power to control every aspect of women's life, including their thoughts, feelings, behavior, and mobility. And most of the time, they introduce these controllings as a good manner. They are so proud because they feel like we are taking care of you. So you should be thankful, not questioning our behavior. Or John Galton, I hope the pronunciation is right, demonstrate in his work, which is Cultural Violence, the important point about the different meaning of violence in each society. This is very interesting. For instance, each society can make direct and structural violence look and even feel justified or at least not wrong. Well, he actually more explained about three colors: red, green, and yellow. In some countries, you can actually recognize one behavior very justified and has a green color, and the same behavior in another society can recognize as a violence, and gets the red color. So this is very important to know that the meaning of domestic violence is different in each society and in each culture. And this is exactly what is happening in Iran. In some respects, coercive control has even been considered to be positive act. I mean, it's not negative, but it's positive. And the affirmative face of masculinity. I mean, most of women has accepted that this is the identity of men to control women. So, they feel like this is it and we cannot change it. This is men's identity. In other words, the cultural system in Iran does not recognize some destructive acts to be essentially violent. The word غیرت or zeal reflects this claim. غیرت is a normal act by men in order to prove their masculinity and their care to women, which we are all familiar with. In this sense, when the society and the law, not just the culture in the society, but also the situation of women in law, accept this coercive control and actually apply in every aspect of women's life, women have no place to report about this kind of violence because it's not gonna be recognized as a violence or as a, as a unknown, behavior. If you go to your mother, as one of my interviewer, Ashraf, told me, she was explaining to her mother about her husband and how her husband is trying to tell her what to do and what not to do, what to wear or not to wear, especially during the quarantine, because women had to stay at home and they were facing this kind of challenges with their men more. So she told me that even her mother told her that you should appreciate that your man is taking care of you and he is actually controlling you because he's in love with you. So this is like the place that the woman is like, okay, I want to escape. I cannot, argue with people around me because they will not accept or recognize or understand my feeling about what I'm going through. So the only way is to just live it, accept the situation and try to adopt myself with this kind of behavior. During my interview, I have heard so many stories in these regards. Some were familiar for me, some not, even worse than I thought. And women were subjected, for instance, to the sexual violence, but they said by their husband, and in response they said, what we can do, and there is some, especially in the sexual violence, it's also a space of not being able to discuss this kind of issue with other people. So they are like, okay, I will accept that, I just let it go. And one of my interviewer told me that because of the stress, which were economical, especially stress that they were facing during the quarantine, she forced herself to be ready for her husband for the sexual relationship, in case to not be a witness of any argument with the children, because she was explaining that if my husband is so stressful, under a lot of pressure, and if I don't give him what he wants, he might go with an argument with the children, and I don't want this happens. So I try to sacrifice myself and my feelings, ignore about how I've been used as a tool for my husband, and try to keep the atmosphere of home safe and quiet. As I told you, Iranian women endure violence. They stand the violence. It's like they have no other choice. Especially those women who have not financial support, and they try to just follow the things that has been described for them as being a good woman, and try not to argue about. Some of them, it's very sad to know that some of them, when you face them about the subject and telling them that your husband or your father has no right to do this action to you, they are like, oh, are you crazy? I mean, I cannot even question these things to my male figure, you know. And this is very sad, and they prefer not to talk about it in order to avoid also the stigma. This controlling behavior over women can be observed in all men around the woman. So it's not just about the husband or father or brother, but also other men in the family, even in the society, you know, because of the situation of women, men let themselves to give their opinion toward women when they think it's needed, you know. The majority of women participants believe that most of the problem are rooted in the culture, which is hardly affected by the religion. I mean, for me, it was very interesting because it was first time hearing loud voices from women about the role of religion in their life. So they were actually recognizing the religion as a main tool to be repressed. And this was very interesting because most of them were actually religious women, you know. They pray 5 times a day, you know, they do fasting and love. But at the end, they are like, you know, these things, if we, especially those women who are not familiar with the discourse and they cannot support their opinion with going through an argument, you know, they can be shut down by just one phrase coming from their religion and saying that this is your role, you know, this is what you need to do. And they are understanding this fact that the role of religion is very important in repressing women. And for me was very interesting hearing this actually opinion from religious women themselves. And also they said since the controlling behaviors of men are culturally accepted by the majority of people, even those who think differently prefer not to oppose prevailing thinking. So they are like, even if we share this thing with someone, especially men, they are like, you're overthinking, you know, you're just touching a very not important issue, so they prefer to keep it on themselves and not talk about their feelings and what they are going through. However, the legal status of women shows a more comprehensive understanding of how coercive control conceptualized and accepted within the Iranian context. My research illustrates the complex interplay between victims, perpetrators, the culture, and the state. Quarantine forced women to stay inside with the people who are the perpetrators of violence against them. Although women who were the subject of domestic violence may not have reported their, the violences, especially during the quarantine, but based on my interview, which are indicated on the paper, the cases has increased due to increased restriction. And I will be happy to go to questions. Thank you for listening to me. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you both. What was interesting for me was that in both studies, participants were aware of the collective reasons behind their problems, and also in your research, even the collective solution to their problems. So I was wondering if you can tell us a bit more about your participant, your sampling process, how you could recruit these participants, and how much do you think it's extendable to society of Tehran, or even in greater sense to Iranian society in general?
As I said, my research has conducted 5 years ago. I had just 1 month that I could travel to Iran from Sweden. So I didn't have that much time to find from different perspective, women from different perspective, but I have tried to find women in different areas, like in center of Tehran and in south of Tehran. But I could say that most of them were educated and they were familiar with the subject. But I would say that the Iran society has changed during these years, and the women are much more progressive now. Even when I traveled to Tehran recently, I was shocked somehow. They were more brave than me, and they were actively question others, even men, about the sexual harassment. They tried to speak loudly, and they tried to fight and resistance somehow. I could say that we cannot, of course, for qualitative research, we cannot generalize. But some part of my findings and states that women mentioned still can generalize somehow in Tehran. But I could say that they are more active in society. They even they try to be more active, not passive in front of men when it happens sexual harassment. I'm saying these states based on my observation recently of Tehran. But yeah, for my research, most of them are educated. Most of the participants are educated and from the same level of same level of knowledge of living in urban spaces, and they face every day these problems. So they were so active in focus groups also.
Well, Zainab Jun, I think thanks to social media, because nowadays, at least we can say those women who access through the social media, they can get informed about so many different subjects. And as a result, they can be more aware, comparing to the past. And well, in my study, I have tried very carefully to somehow reflect the voice of women from different classes. But in the same time, it's hard because so many things is impacts on women's life. I mean, you cannot, as Zohreh Jun said, you cannot generalize the result of your work at all. We just opened, a station and hoping that others going and, following the subject. But I can see that comparing to the past, these days, women are more aware of the different type of violence. At least they know that these things are actually recognizing as a violence, because in my speaking with women, you can hear the how do you say, the anger, the anger that they had, they were like, yes, I had to do this, I had to, accept this situation. They knew that this is violence. They are not able to, change their situation. But in the same time, I think we can say they level up in the sense that now they know they can live, differently. But I have tried to, most of my interview were through the WhatsApp or Skype, and try to get connected with women in different cities. For instance, in Qom, in Tehran, in Hamadan, and with the different cultures. But one thing was, actually, I can say bravely that one thing was seen through all women, and that was the awareness, the feeling that we shouldn't stay in this level, and this is not our right. We have to change our situation. But most of the older women were hoping for changing for the next generation. They were like, it happened what it happened to us, but we try to change the situation for our next generation.
I'm afraid that we are going run out of the time. I don't know if we still have time for questions from audiences.
And thank you for a very nice presentation. I have a question for Hamideh. And if we look at Iran's legislation, already law gives a lot of control to men. So, like, you cannot work if you're married, or you have the permission of your father to get passport or your husband to go out of the country. In many cases, that this control happens, so that's in a normal case, and I can imagine that COVID also accelerates that, and that also. You have the whole nahiyaz, the gasht shad, and that's even on the street people can tell you that you are not wearing. So how do you relate that awareness that is very important among women, but how do you see the strategy or the solution that when there is no supporting or enabling environment for women to demand that their rights, so they can demand their rights, of course, but then that is legislation are against them. How can they will be supported to gain that autonomy that they can also have that control, so to regain that control about their own their own choices?
That's a very important question, since, as you mentioned, for instance, Article 1108 says that the women have to be obedient, to their men. So this is what we have in the law. So how women can change their situation without changing, the legislation. And it's very interesting, because also women that I were interviewed, they said the same thing. They were like, Hamideh, what are you saying? I mean, we have in religion, in law, they are saying that we are less than men. Not very, they used some bad words I'm not gonna say here, but somehow I feel like we cannot, or maybe we have two rules in changing the situation. One should be culturally. We have to impact our culture and try to tell people, because as you know, the socialists telling that for changing the society, you have to go two roads, from down to up and up to down. So I'm trying to say that one of the very important role for us as an activist is to aware or educate women about their rights and how can they impact their men, or changing their situation in their small family, as they are doing. Hamideh Sadeghi mentioned in her book, Women's Veiling, Revealing, Unveiling, she emphasized how women, through the generation, changed, their situation in the family. They couldn't change any legislation or law, but at least they have tried to gain some rights that they didn't get for their future generation, for their girls. And to be honest, we can see that happened. If my grandmother didn't have the right to get the education, but she tries to give it to me. You know what I mean? And culturally, as an activist, we can do some of this stuff, but in that part, we have absolutely no other option than, changing the structural system, the legal structural system, which we all are trying, men and women. And it's very important to inform the men of our society and face them with the patriarchal structure that we are facing in Iran. Because you can see that most of men cannot recognize the situation and the, gender inequality and the situation of women in Iran. So it's very important to inform them about the patriarchal society, structural system, not just in the law, but also in the culture. Because just think that we change their structure and women's situation is getting better in the law, as we have been experienced during the second Pahlavi, but women were facing so many problems into the society. So it's very important to, and as you saw in the comparing during the Pahlavi with the Islamic regime, men had the power to give the women the freedom, define that freedom, or to take it from them. So it's very important for us as the Iranian women to be aware of getting the power by ourselves. And not by men, and not asking them to giving us the power, because they can get it back. So yeah, sorry for the long explanation.
So thank you again for joining this panel, and hope see you in other panels and also tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, ladies.